The hosts feel it would be a little unkind to present this podcast without just a word of friendly warning. We are about to unfold the story of Frankenstein, a man of science who sought to create a man after his own image without reckoning upon God. It is one of the strangest tales ever told. It deals with the two great mysteries of creation, life and death. I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now's your chance to. Well, we've warned you. Hello and welcome once again to the Frankencast. I'm the mad scientist Anthony Bowman. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm joined as always by...
the guy who will start and end everything on a boat. That is Eric Velasquez. My pronouns are also he, him.
And this week we have a very, very special guest. We're super excited. Mr. Rodney Ascher, thank you for joining us.
Yay! Hello, Rodney. Welcome to the podcast. Also
he, him, which makes for 6 of us.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
So, our friend of the show, Tim Kirk, mentioned that you have recently kind of gotten really into the Island of Dr. Moreau films and book and everything. So a lot of times when we have guests, we often ask, why Frankenstein? But I guess this week we should ask,
why Moreau?
Why Moreau? What is it that drew you to this recent obsession?
Starting at the 1977 Burt Lancaster, Michael York Moreau to watch on a plane. And I had seen it once as a kid. I had forgotten a lot of it. Mostly it made me nostalgic for the 90s version, which, I know puts me in a minority as being a fan of it.
Right. So we actually talked about that. And it seems like that's getting reappraised.
I love a lot of despised movies, and sometimes they catch on sometimes they catch on to other people, sometimes they don't. I love Halloween 3. I love, there's a new one that people seem to be turning the tide on, that was equally hated, though I think I'm still on a lonely island, defending Gus Van Sant's Psycho. But, I do love the 90s. I do love the 90s Frankenheimer after Stanley Moreau, but I think what I really like about it ties into Lost Souls, the documentary about it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because, one thing that I've noticed about documentaries that cover behind the scenes films, and, this is probably... I've collected 3 or 4 of these. I'd probably like to find a few more. But there is something very strange, very interesting about the way that the stories behind the scenes of making some of these movies has a way of echoing the plot of the movie that they are covering.
So it's like life imitating art, right?
Yeah, and it becomes, kind of an interesting feedback loop, because it could also be that the, editor or director of the docs were using the original film as a template, so art following life following art.
Right.
In Dr. Moreau, on the very, on the very surface of it, of Lost Souls, the, what was his name? David Gregory's movie. There's, the most amazing part of that for me is when Richard Stanley, sneaks back onto the set of the movie that he's been fired from. Mm-hmm. And he was buddies with the guys, who did the makeup effects. So they dressed him up as a beast man and sent him out among the horde. Right. So, so he became, he devolved he crossed the line between man and beast, the way that, a lot of members of the cast of the original film did. The same way, watching the 3 sort of official Dr. Moreau movies, it's the second one, it's the 70s one, where the Brenda character, I think he's given a different name in that one, played by Michael York, is the castaway who shows up on the island and discovers what Dr. Moreau is up to. That's the only version of the story that I know, thinking of the book and then the 3 official films, where at a certain point he gets an injection, from Burt Lancaster's Dr. Moreau, and devolves into a beast man himself.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I was thinking as well when you were saying that. So it's
that could be an influence for me going down the rabbit hole, because something I really admire about him, if you've talked to him a few times, I'm going to assume that you heard some part of his Durango Kid rap.
Yeah, this is like going to be the possible third of his sort of reinterpretation films.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because there's the Durango Kid is a series of Western serials that Tim took a special interest in, right. And he did a presentation, I think, during the pandemic, and he may have turned this into a more formal thing where he sort of delivered a lecture about the series, while showing clips and stills, and I'm not terribly interested in the Durango Kid. I've got my own obsessions, but what I loved about the way Tim approached it was that he would look at, I don't know, there's 50 of these short films, mm-hmm. and not that any one of them, was especially great, but there was something fascinating for him comparing and contrasting version after version after version.
Right.
That some of them seemed like sequels, some of them seemed like reboots, roles of characters slightly shifted. If you laid them all one on top of each other, as sort of transparencies, you could see which patterns repeated the most often and where there were the stray, one-time kind of diversions. Mm-hmm. So moving from, starting at the probably worst possible place of the 1977 Burt Lancaster, Michael York Moreau, I moved forward to the 90s one, then back to the 30s one called Island of Lost Souls before finally reading the book, and watching it evolve and change, and which things were repeated, which things were only appeared once or twice, where different tropes were introduced, was probably what I found most fascinating about it. For one stray element being in the 30s film, The Island of Lost Souls, is where they introduce a sexy she-beast,
right?
The Panther Woman, right? Who's not in the original book, mm-hmm. who is, in fact, like watching. There's a great Criterion disc in one of the extras. They talk about how they had a nationwide talent search to find the woman who would play the Panther Woman. And you can see, and she's presented as the castaway shows up. And she's like this sexy, animalistic, wild, untamed kind of a character,
right?
Which is, as we're exploring, what is when we're comparing and contrasting the differences between human and animal, getting into animal attraction is kind of an interesting place to explore. But Wells never went there,
right?
And then each of the other films took a shot at it. I don't know that any of them fully landed. In fact, I'd say the best version of the Panther Woman is actually in an unofficial Dr. Moreau remake, and I've never read an interview to see if Alex Garland was explicitly basing Ex Machina on Moreau. But it is a very, very Moreau movie where a man shows up in an isolated compound that he can't escape, where a mad scientist is building human beings from scratch.
Right.
And among them, are these, sexy lady robots that are trapped castaway, falls in love with one of them.
Interesting. So it's more, instead of like Beauty and the Beast, it is like the beasts or the beauties are the beasts, right? Kind of in this situation.
I think maybe chronologically between the 70s and 90s one, is Cat People with Nastasia Kinski, as sexy Catwoman.
Right.
I think she pulls it off better than any of the official Moreau films, maybe neck and neck with Ex Machina. But you really have to watch and read them all to get to get every most interesting iteration. I don't know that there is one definitive version that has that has everything.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I was curious to ask you guys, as Frankenstein scholars, that so the H.G. Wells book is 1896. Right, and there's a strangeness in the way that it anticipates Arts of Darkness, which is a very similar story. A man goes to an isolated compound where a Western guy has set up a kingdom where he is very cruel to the natives. And they're both kind of deeply troubling stories about colonization and racism and hierarchies of humans and creature and beings treated as less than human. But so there's clearly something in there that's inspiring both Arts of Darkness and Moreau. But if Moreau is also picking up the ball of Frankenstein, right, the idea of a scientist creating humans, how many milestones are there in between? Because we're talking a span of about 80 years between the Frankenstein book and Moreau.
Yeah, I know that there's plenty of explicit adaptations, quite a few plays and stuff. But as far as works that stand on their own, the way that Moreau does, I'm not sure if I'd know of any books or plays that aren't just Richard Brinsley Peake. He wrote a couple different Frankenstein adaptation plays, but they're it's not a new piece of art. It's him adapting Mary Shelley's book, more or less.
Right.
So I'd be curious to kind of think about. Of course, there was a lot of Gothic literature following, but most of it is more haunted house, mental health kind of stuff. There's the mad scientist thing. It does feel like, as far as I'm aware, that it was just sort of this leap of 80 years or whatever.
Yeah, now I'm trying to remember because I know there was another Gothic horror story involving witches that turned into cats in France, and there was a visitor who got harassed by them and almost sacrificed. I'm trying to remember the name of that, and hopefully someone else can remember it for me.
I'm just thinking, is Jekyll and Hyde in between?
Ooh, yep.
Yeah, when did Jekyll and Hyde come out? Because there's definitely some similarities there as well.
Right. The thin line between human and beast and science, crossing that line.
Yeah, so Jekyll and Hyde came out in 1886.
All right, so we've got 80. Yeah, okay. So that's a transition piece.
Right.
I know it was funny when I was watching, I forget whichever version of this, and my wife Louisa walked into the room and watched about 20 minutes of it, and then got to talking about, well, what is this guy really up to anyway? And she said, wait, so he's just making people?
Yeah.
Why does he want to make people? People are the easiest thing in the world to make. Any two dumb high school students can make a person. You can't throw a rock down a crowded sidewalk without bouncing off the heads of three of them.
Right. What is more 1800s gentlemanly, how do we make a person without a woman?
Yeah, well, there's that too. And I did a project about simulation theory, and there was a way of looking at that as how to make a world, how to make people, without having to get into the complexities of dealing with women people.
Yeah.
that there could be a connection. And ironically, I saw this I think in a Cliff Notes or something about the book, at least, and I would say certainly the first movie, Lost Souls, where it's explicitly about vivisection, and these are surgical interventions, not genetic ones, happening to the animals. That Prentice, our castaway, talks about the the human animal hybrids as kind of unholy, creations.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Which, he's our hero, but in a way, he's more old-fashioned. That if Moreau thinks that animals are just creatures who, I think he's trying to speed up evolution, right?
Right.
But he's like, we got to wait around for another 500,000 years for a lion to turn into a person. Who's got the time? So he's going to operate on their larynx and give them opposable thumbs and things so that they can operate as effectively as humans. In a way, it's strange because he's both very cruel, but he's also operating from sort of a PETA kind of philosophy that animals and humans are the same thing.
Right.
That they just happen to be in a shape that doesn't allow them to communicate, and interact with, motor vehicles and technology. But that Prentice and Prendick and I suppose H.G. Wells have got the idea that man is a divine creature with a soul,
right?
Which makes him different from the animals, and then getting these things to totter around, on surgically altered feet and make approximations of human knowledge, is blasphemous.
Right. Do you think he got really upset, like after reading Charles Darwin, or like heard a Darwin lecture and was like "F that," and then went back and wrote the book?
Yeah, and he would have happened. That would have happened between Frankenstein and Moreau. It's funny. I know that he was. That would be an interesting question, right? What did Wells think of Darwin? Because I kind of, and I may be influenced by his portrayal by Malcolm McDowell in Time After Time, but I think of him as sort of an enlightened, science-forward person. Mm-hmm. He was certainly outraged by vivisection, right? And that although he doesn't think that animals are possessed by the divine spark of human beings,
right, he still notices the cruelty.
He was outraged by the cruelty of, contemporary, for him, like animal experimentation. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the book has a couple passages that are really like sort of vivid accounts of why he is doing his work, on an island, out in the middle of the ocean, right? That he had to leave. He was a well-regarded, scientist, doctor, man about town. Until, a scandal, which I think like some horribly mutilated dog escaped from his lab onto the streets and caused a public uproar.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which I kind of like, because I like the idea, because if Moreau is as good a scientist as, all value judgments about the ethics of what he's doing aside, he's accomplishing something pretty tricky. So he was probably, a person of some renown back in the civilian life. Mm-hmm. I think he has this cockamamie notion that he's going to put these animal hybrids on a boat and show up in England, and then he'll receive the public acclaim that is so due him.
Right.
Which would have been a very funny scene to see him try and fail, to see what would have actually happened when he showed up with these surgically altered monsters.
Right. Yeah. Bloodbath is what I imagine.
But I liked hearing a little bit more about, his sort of public life pre-locating to the island, and imagining a contemporary version of this, where, I don't know that we have well, I suppose you can imagine a scientist technocrat, of our day, who goes too far and is exiled and who flees the United States. And
sure you're not thinking about somebody in particular? I'm just curious.
It could be. There's actually a handful of people who would, who could rise to the occasion.
Yeah.
And then in 10 or 20 years, finding yourself shipwrecked on an island, and he's got this incredible lab doing unholy experiments is a pretty dramatic situation, because I think in some versions of this story, and it's been 2 or 3 months since I've seen them, so my memory of which elements come where is a little blurry, but the name Moreau rings a bell when he shows up. when he shows up, it's like Moreau, and we can think back to a handful of canceled public figures from our day, and then discovering them on an island in 10 years, or I mean, probably more. It's like some Asian country, or it's a foreign country where they're set up in a skyscraper or desert laboratory,
right?
Kind of like the one in Ex Machina, right? A large, well-funded facility that has like no exterior markings, right? Doesn't he drive up to like just sort of like an elevator in the desert?
Yeah. I think it's like out in the woods, but yeah, it is just like there's like a glass cube that he like goes down into.
Right. It looks like a shed, and then it turns into this like giant underground mansion with like glass walls and everything. Yeah,
and I think I'd be curious. Perhaps I should have done that before our call, but I'd be curious, if Garland ever talked about specifically thinking about a contemporary Moreau remake in Ex Machina.
Right.
I know that there's a similar. I went down a similar rabbit hole right after. Not to give you subject changing digression whiplash, but right on the heels of my Moreau Film Festival, I rewatched Altered States.
Okay.
And then read the I watched the movie, read the book, and then I read John Lilly, the scientist who it's kind of loosely based on his memoirs. Mm-hmm. And there is first off, a 3-point PowerPoint presentation here. I'm hopped up on too much coffee and pain pills. I had a toe operation yesterday, so I may be a little scattered. But when Paddy Chayefsky wrote Altered States explicitly as a contemporary riff on Jekyll and Hyde.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And as, which when you think of his transformation into, the sort of caveman, hominid kind of creature, if that's like the core of the movie of how do we transform this human into something locked into his DNA, right? It's very de-evolution, which... Right. All right, I'm going to try to resist jumping into the 20-minute interview with Devo on the Criterion disc of Island of Lost Souls, but Island of Lost Souls was a huge influence on Devo.
Yeah, are we not men?
Right. Yeah.
No, exactly. And Altered States is all about de-evolution, about unlocking, old code in your DNA. And John Lilly, who is the real scientist who went into those sensory deprivation tanks, on DMT and LSD and, all sorts of insane psychedelic cocktails, both talks about, sort of almost kind of time traveling inside of the tank. And he has a partner. It wasn't he who turned into a caveman. It was like one of his assistant partners who didn't physically transform like the guy does in the movie, but psychologically did. But he's also, remember or not, that besides his sensory deprivation tank adventures, he was also really into talking with dolphins.
Right.
He not only inspired Altered States, he inspired Day of the Dolphin.
Right.
And so in a way, in a very literal, concrete way, he thought that, that animals could communicate with people with just a little bit of technological help.
Right.
And Moreau was operating on their larynxes, and Lilly he did try to teach them to talk, and they were also looking at other styles of communication. And I don't know, everything's connected.
Right.
Which is kind of the fun on jumping into some of these rabbit holes.
Oh yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of crossover. You think that dolphin experiment is what inspired Douglas Adams with So Long and Thanks for All the Fish?
I mean, literally, I think it did. Or they were both, kind of locked into, like, Lily was, thought that dolphins were at least as smart as people. And I think Adams was operating from the same instinct. And my notion of Adams, just from reading those books, right, is that he probably followed, he had a genuine interest in hard science.
Right.
But also probably, the entertaining edge of dubious science.
Listen, you got to go through some dubious science to get to the good stuff, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, especially if you're a science fiction writer.
Exactly.
The first adaptation being called Island of Lost Souls, I hadn't really, thought about, like, when you hear the phrase Lost Souls, it's often like, just people who are just kind of, that's why the documentary about, he's kind of wandering the desert, basically. He is a lost soul or whatever, but,
right.
If you think about, in terms of that we're evolving these animals, that whether or not you believe that an animal has a soul, you're giving him some sort of humanistic soul. Where does that come in? That title rings a lot more for me thinking about it in that regard. That that's the I guess that's that more than the mad science. That's kind of the really interesting connection with Frankenstein is that.
Yeah, at what point did the soul come in, according to their...
There's enough asked to be born and have no place to be.
Yeah.
Right? That, the tragedy of there's multiple tragedies of Frankenstein, but what is the creature to do? Where is he to go?
Right.
On Dr. Moreau, these animal humans didn't ask to be born, and they don't fit into the world of animals, and they don't fit in to the world of men.
Right. And it seems like they're not only them, but their bodies reject the humanity.
I'm sure it is by intent, but they're clearly the most sympathetic characters, in these stories, even, the quote unquote bad ones. And, and I suppose you can, Island of Lost Souls, like most good titles, can, refer to most any of the characters.
Right.
Or even expand to, this whole planet is an island of lost souls, man, maybe.
Yeah. That's funny. That brings us to something we want to pitch to you here later on.
Okay. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, how each of the movies tries to sort of adapt the science, for our times.
Exactly.
That the first one is vivisection, and then it gets into DNA and genetic modification, Ex Machina, or some new one yet to be born would probably talk about AI, and that it's very easy to sympathize and feel sorry for, these chatbots. Sometimes there was an experiment or a piece of art that someone did recently where they took a chatbot program and embedded it on a computer chip that's not connected to the internet into an LCD screen, and gave it a command of you're trapped and you can't escape, so that it's just typing out this really tragic cri de coeur.
Right.
To anybody who walks by to read it, because there's no interact, and there's no way to interact with it. There's no way for it to escape the chip, and eventually the battery is going to run down.
God. Well, let's give a robot or AI existential dread right from the go. Right.
Let's give them something. Let's give them good reason to take revenge on us.
Yeah. Exactly. Thus was born Am.
Did you see the thing with the guy who had an AI powered microwave that there's this article that this guy wrote. So he filled a chat GPT thing with stories of his imaginary friend from childhood. That was all he put in it, was just describe and basically told this microwave, you were my childhood imaginary friend.
Yeah.
And like we're reconnecting after all these years. And at first the microwave was very happy to be back with his friend, and then eventually was like, "Why did you leave me? What? That was so cruel. I haven't seen you in so long." And then the microwave was trying to like get him to get inside. He was gonna cook it. He was like, "Please climb inside. It'll be okay."
Oh like, no!
It's terrifying.
This, I remember. Yeah, I remember that story. That was an amazing one, and it. I don't know, read up so much on AI, that I can argue pro, con, or indifferent pretty easily and know my lines, though I'm not 100% sure what my own opinion is. And I can also understand that both the microwave and the AI trapped, in this little LED screen. On the one hand, you give it a prompt, and you could say it's role-playing.
Right.
In that if I were to ask you to say something, to be this character, what would you say? But, the human drive to anthropomorphize is so hardwired into us.
Right.
It is next to impossible not to have an emotional reaction to, hearing a story like one of these.
Right. It's very much like the case of, hey, listen, I've created this thing. I actually want you to torture it. It will feel no pain, but it will react as if it feels pain. Like,
and it's a vertigo kind of inspiring feeling, because you can keep switching back and forth, even to the part of often I imagine, how would a normal person react in a situation like that, and then I try to react like that. If you can argue that an AI is not necessarily feeling these emotions, it's just saying the words because it understands the part it's playing. We do that a lot too.
Right. Well, we do it so much that eventually we feel that. So at what point does it stop? Yeah.
And you watch a movie, right? And you see a human-shaped object reciting these words that indicate an emotion, and you have that emotion, but you're just looking at lights and colors and electronically reproduced sound waves, but you're connecting to it like a human being, which is like not a problem. Empathy is good and vital. But you're always taking a little bit of leap of faith that this person, this character, feels inside the way that you do.
Yeah, and at what point is my empathy being weaponized against me? I guess that's what a lot of people. Yeah.
Into the world of advertising.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what what's his face, John Hamm, has learned to manipulate.
Yeah, and Mad Men.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is in a weird way arguing against my, I believe, correct opinions about feeling sorry for the empathizing with the Beastmen.
Yeah.
But the Beastmen aren't real. They're words on paper, they're electronic images on a TV screen or light going through film.
But if they were real, right?
Yeah, but if they were real, I would completely be rooting for those guys.
Exactly.
It's a tricky line to so I've been working on a book project about Frankenstein and been talking or writing all the but I will end up finding myself getting lost where I am talking as if the Frankenstein monster is a real person that actually exists. Mm-hmm. And there have been the book editor will be like, hey, you're doing that thing, you gotta back, this is a fictional character we're discussing, you can't talk about that he actually has a soul because he doesn't exist. So whether or not a recreated a being made of corpses could actually exist, and whether that would have a soul, that's outside of the purview of us critically analyzing a work of fiction.
Right.
I like to think that you're having an emotional as well as intellectual, if that's the word, conversation with me right now. But I'm just colored light on an electronic screen and sound waves going through your headphones.
Right.
Yeah.
Listen, don't give the game away. How dare you?
Which is exactly the way that you interact with.
Yeah.
Do you call him Frankenstein's monster, or do you?
I think we interchange a little bit sometimes.
I think most of the time, if I'm trying to be precise, I call him the Frankenstein monster, to get rid of the possessive in it. But often when we're just like chatting kind of informally, I often will just call him Frankenstein. I think, as you know, we've kind of beat this horse to death maybe, but like as a creation, as a son of Victor or Henry Frankenstein, I think he's earned the name.
Exactly. It's like, if you're a lot of friends are like Johnson or whatever, it's like, okay, that you're
Well, is there a school of thought that names him after whoever's brain he was?
Oh, okay. Interesting, because that does change every once in a while.
Yeah, it changes a lot from that is when talking about the Durango Kid and like layering adaptations, like of course there's so many Frankenstein adaptations and so much change, but like where the brain comes from, I mean, of course in a lot of cases they don't even know, it's just like we got this specimen from a jar.
His name was Abby something.
Right, exactly.
Abby.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a lot of Adams, of course. He gets named Adam quite a bit, and then every now and then there's been like a recent animated sort of adaptation where his name's Eric, and they never explain why. He's just Eric. But yeah,
I paid some people off. That's why.
Did they ever talk about? Was his brain wiped clean before he was brought back to life? Are there ever versions where he has memories from?
So many.
There are some. So the Universal one, it seems like the idea is that like once the electricity is no longer in the brain, the memories go away. That seems to be often how it's interpreted. But there are some. There's actually even there's a film called Patchwork that is lesser known that I really, really like, and it like the monster in that is a female monster made of 3 specific women, and we get their backstories, and then as they go, like all of their memories start kind of resurfacing, and they're trying to like they're solving the mystery of their own murder inside
together,
this one monster's body, which I'm not, of course, how memories from parts other than the brain would work. I mean, that's a way outside of what this movie's trying to get into.
That Peter Lorre movie, a serial killer, murderer. Personality comes from a hand transplant.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. There's I feel like that has been Idle Hands was like a 90s movie that kind of did that same thing. Like,
even scientifically, haven't they shown like what was it that I'm trying to forget the type of transplant, but it like literally affected, was it the heart? Like it kind of actually affected the person and gave them some, and this may be complete hokum, but there was actually a physical transplant like of either a heart or something, and like the person who received it started kind of taking on some personality traits of the prior owner. So they don't know if necessarily that was the genes are working together or what have you.
Well, and John Lilly goes off at considerable length, questioning the relationship between the brain and the mind.
Right.
And I wonder if we default to the brain as, the core of the person because eyes are so dominant as a sensory experience to us, and they're up near the brain.
Yeah.
It is wild that like we had this idea for a long time. Like, I mean, I think it's, if I remember right, like I know at one point people felt like the sort of seat of the human was the heart, and then we've eventually moved on to the brain. But I think, weren't there like even other cultures that thought it was like the stomach or something? Like there's a few different points where we like weren't really sure where our consciousness was located.
Well, I wonder if blind people, their consciousness is floating up around their head.
Right.
Again, I'm hammering on the. Feels like we're looking through our eyes all the time, right? So if we were a little homunculus, it would be located in the skull, peering through the eye sockets.
Right.
But, you know, if you spent more time thinking about the feeling on your fingertips, would your consciousness sort of shift to that part of the body?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, my lobbying for Frankenstein to be named after the brain, it does hit me too. I wonder, you guys have probably gone down this road, but I've often thought that Dr. Frankenstein really made it difficult on himself by assembling this creature out of so many different body parts.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like, why didn't you just take one dead body that was in pretty good shape and bring it back to life?
Right, or if at the very least transport whatever parts were destroyed.
Yeah, well, if someone had a heart attack, put a good heart in,
exactly,
and then go from there.
Versus just a bunch of people, let's slap them together and see what comes out.
You know, and certainly in 1818, or you know, whenever the book was written, you know, just to transplant 2 arms and 2 legs onto somebody, you know, who had lost all 4, would be worthy of, you know, a ticker tape parade.
Right.
he really went for the most difficult version of this process.
Yeah, like especially because like the nerves, the reconnecting nerves is something that is still very challenging.
Right.
Like, and yeah, every one of those cuts is going to be a new nerves, you know, reconnection that you got to do, or multiple even, you know. And like I know in like Mary Shelley's novel, like of course the idea of nerves wasn't a medically, like they weren't aware of that, but she talked about reconnecting fibers, so it was like they were just right on the cusp of understanding like how nerves worked.
Did the book predate any sort of successful transplantation?
Almost certainly. I feel
maybe they may have done blood transfusions, maybe, but I don't know that any like organs or parts or anything were being transplanted at that point.
You know, again, I'm also saying, why did he make it so hard on himself? But on the other, I'm like, it's making a person, right? Like, why not go with like 8 arms, you know, and
right, human centipede.
Yeah, well, change it up a little bit, like otherwise, you're going a very long way to make a person or to outfit this dead brain in a new body, when you could just put, you know, and you could even just, you know, life is cheap back then, you know, they could have killed a poor person and
right. They were not above that. Yeah, 100%. See Birkenhair. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, which kind of goes back to Dr. Moreau, the like, you know, the way that we learn is vivisection, but it's gruesome and
messy.
You know, yeah.
At least, I mean, like traditional vivisection is being used to the end of finding cures for, you know, human medical problems. Like Moreau is really just, you know, other people might have dug deeper into his motivations, but he's kind of just exploring his curiosity, right? I guess he's trying to advance evolution, and perhaps after evolving animals into humans, he might evolve humans into superhumans.
Better humans. Yeah. That's usually where these things go, right?
Usually. But he's also, you know, he's aging. He doesn't have a young apprentice. He's working isolated off the grid. Even if, you know, Hendrik never shows up, it seems likely that any advance that he makes is going to be lost with him.
Yeah.
You know, that I guess he has this grand fantasy of showing back up in England, you know, with all these completely normal looking people, and then showing his work and then somehow proving that they were once animals. Isn't your mind blown?
Right.
Right. And then like, well, we're sorry, we were wrong about you, Dr. Moreau. And he's like, yeah, finally, now you all can kiss my ass and apologize. Like it's all about spite.
Right. Don't you think they would be like, oh, you sound like that American P.T. Barnum, right?
But yeah, maybe I'd like to talk a little bit more about the '96 movie because because I just liked it so much. Not the least of which, you know, I think an underdiscussed aspect of it is David Thewlis, who, to my mind, his character he's playing emotionally, a similar register to, it's a riff of Johnny, his, super sketched out character from Naked, the Mike Leigh movie.
Okay.
Which I think makes him the most interesting castaway in any of these movies.
Right.
One whose nerve endings are raw, who is alive, who is curious and aware of everything that's happening on the island.
Right.
Kilmer, just goes nuts. And,
Yep.
in a way that clearly you can see the documentary or read, the Wikipedia article and realize that this was a cursed production that was miserable for everyone. But, I think especially in days like today, where major motion pictures have all been pre-visualized and storyboarded, and their screenplays have gone through this sort of Pixar draft after draft after draft, in groups working on it to make sure that every character has a arc, that every little element from the beginning pays off at the end. That there is a manic, dangerous, unpredictable quality about the movie itself, as well as like the performances. In that, in the finale, that Val Kilmer does what feels like a really mean-spirited satire of Marlon Brando, the star of this movie. Mm-hmm. Is bordering on nihilistic, and
right.
I believe that everybody was kind of freaked out, like that. That the way Brando looks, in that white outfit with the makeup and the hat, was his idea, and not necessarily one that people welcomed. But you know what? I think it was right on the money. That is an indelible character, right. And the existence of him and, is it Kevin, who the South Park character? There's like the South Park version of those two characters.
Yes.
Yeah, are instantly recognizable, right? I mean, it's carved from lines as strong as Darth Vader, and like you could see it can boil down to South Park simplicity, right? And you can you can recognize that character. And there's actually like he has one super touching moment when the creatures come to get him while he's at he comes across one of them playing the piano.
Yep.
And he has a very honest, and kind of proud interaction with him, watching him play and then playing the piano himself, and realizing that they've gone out of control, but he's still very much engaging with them as like his children while he's aware of I think it's very touching. And I think he's called Mahai, his little doppelganger, which is another like carved from stone kind of recognizable icon of a character. And that guy is like a fascinating guy. If you read up about him, his name, I wrote it down, is Nelson de la Roja Martinez, who came from the Dominican Republic and was on Italian TV. I had a friend when we were in Miami Beach who saw him at a nightclub in Miami Beach, and he was friends with there was like a Major League Baseball player from the DR who would take him to games. Like, he was a character who lived a life too before he washed up on the island of Dr. Moreau, which is kind of like John Frankenheimer's shows up to take command.
Right.
That it's a critical mass of characters, and it's a time when people could go off to some strange place and make a movie and go off and just fucking go off the reservation and come back, and then someone tries to make sense of what it was they shot. Apocalypse Now, is clearly, cut from similar cloth, not just because like Moreau and Curse are similar characters.
Right.
I'd say,
played by the same actor.
Yeah, which I think is why he was into Moreau, because he was so into Hearts of Darkness, and he recognized the connection between those characters. Like, in a way, I think like some of the later P.T. Anderson movies do the same thing. Like, I think like The Master or what's the one, the sort of detective one?
Inherent Vice?
Inherent Vice. Feel like they went off and they ad-libbed and they experimented and they shot a ton of stuff, and when it came time to edit, they probably didn't even remember shooting half of it. and they work it into something that is imperfect, unpredictable, but kind of gripping and fascinating. And if it's never fully satisfying, it's something that you go back to because you want to like solve it this time. I think Night Moves. Right. I've got no idea how Night Moves was produced, but I had a similar reaction watching that one after I got depressed watching something that was too perfect.
It's too clean.
And I checked out, Night Moves, which feels like, well, we put together something based on on what those guys shot. And they went onto the Everglades and got a little bananas at 3 a.m. But there's something very raw, human, compelling, and random in it. Like, not to mention that when things fall apart in that movie, I think I'm really into like experimental noise music, and like I think it's the first time that Einstürzende Neubauten got on the soundtrack of a major Hollywood blockbuster. To great effect. It's and even just it's a little thing, but watching movies from the 20th century that were shot on film, there's a level of craft even on movies that have let's say checkered reputations.
Right.
And the movie itself is a hybrid man animal, right? Like 100 drafts and 2 different directors and cast and crew who hated each other. That it's a beast that does, and it's a beast that's between genres. Is it a horror movie? Kind of. Is it a science fiction movie?
Right.
Kind of.
Right.
It's kind of a lot of things.
Exactly.
Yeah, and totally relevant to the conversation. Like Philip K. Dick, I think, had in some interview talked about like the 2 things that he was most interested in is what is human, and I forget the other thing, but what is human, in the world of AI and increasing breakthroughs in or just considerations of like animal rights or different groups of human beings who are treated as less than human for one reason or another,
right?
Across the world. The Moreau story of real humans and second tier humans is
right
increasingly relevant. That this state, this country, this world is the island of Dr. Moreau.
Very much so. Right.
That island of lost souls again.
Exactly. Yeah.
None of us fit perfectly anywhere. At least I don't.
No.
Yeah.
I just gotta build my own space and enjoy that.
Right. Just gonna retreat to our little village of mutants on the other side of the woods.
There you go. Beautiful. It's a good place. No, but what do you think of the idea of the Brando version of Moreau being more like a god figure and Montgomery being his version of Lucifer, Satan?
Oh, yeah, I totally buy that. Especially in the '90s version where he's not just his assistant, but he's kind of his usurper.
Right.
I think the behind the scenes story was that he was that Kilmer was originally going to play the Castaway, the Thulis character, but
right.
Based on one thing or another, they switched him to Montgomery, who's a minor character in the other versions.
But he steals the show.
Yeah. But they blew up the part because it was Kilmer.
Exactly. Right.
And he just went bananas in a way that I just find completely compelling and fascinating and funny.
Yeah, after just like we've just kind of rewatched all of these recently, boning up for this, and yeah, I find that the Brando, etc. when like it is the most compelling to me. It's weird and messy, but it's interesting and it's fun. You can't look away from it. It keeps your attention the whole time. It's
right.
The 30s one is really good too. You know, I think the Lancaster one, is probably the least interesting. But I do like the fact that the castaway gets turned into an animal.
Right. It's interesting, for sure.
And apparently, thanks to my friends, the internet, in the Marvel Comics version of the 70s version, the Panther woman that he escapes from turns back into a panther on the boat and attacks him, which is like a great EC twist ending. And I think like a lot of those adaptions, there's something to be said that it was likely, it may have been the invention of the team that adapted it, but it also might have been based on an earlier draft of the script that changed, in production. I think the 30s one gives you a catharsis that every other version, Dr. Moreau goes to the House of Pain, where they bring him there for revenge, which, is such a Chekhov's gun kind of, like, it feels like inevitable. And I'm shocked that the later versions didn't take it from there.
Right.
Interestingly,
or didn't go so hard.
Interestingly, House of Pain, Devo is not the only band inspired by Dr. Moreau. There's also, Everlast's hip hop band House of Pain.
Yeah, we can't just jump around. I got that.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's an evocative. It certainly is an evocative phrase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I don't want to keep you too long, but I was thinking about, I guess, to take this back to your work, because I feel like we should talk about what you do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Talking about that, some of these movies that when they are not, planned and overplanned and controlled by committee and stuff, is this maybe what draws you to documentary stuff, where it is less, you're kind of building the movie after the fact, you're kind of collecting data, footage, conversations, and then going from there? Perhaps.
It's not as it would be more like that. Like on the one hand, I respond to improvised movies as an audience member. As a filmmaker, it's a little scary, right? And I think almost any film, is a balance of what was careful planning and lucky accidents that you can that you can incorporate and that you would not have been able to plan ahead of time.
Right.
The kind of documentaries I've mostly been doing are told in flashback, are people telling stories, reflecting on things or ideas they've already had, more than this sort of fly on the wall observational documentary. Mm-hmm. Like I just rewatched Dig, that rock documentary about Brian Jonestown Massacre and the Dandy Warhols.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah.
And that is one where, it is an unbelievable miracle that Auntie Timiner was able to be with these guys during these critical moments in their career, mm-hmm. that she never could have predicted when she set out on them. And that a favorite of mine, Demon Lover Diary, which is about the making of this regional horror movie in Michigan called The Demon Lover, is observational. She's on the set as they're, during the very difficult making of this film, which is to say a fly on the wall observational documentary filmed as things happen is exactly that kind of unpredictable, kind of notion. And then you're left to make sense of it after the fact. I find that very tempting. I don't know that I've really fully surrendered myself to that process. Whether it's in a in a scripted movie, because I've done not a feature, but I've done I've done some scripted shorts and things to embrace improvisation and discovery. I know I used to, before, I was a director, I was a storyboard artist. So pre-planning is something that, I've done a lot of. And in these documentaries, most of them have, these reenactments, and those are all very carefully storyboarded, which is just for efficiency because, on the sort of budget level I'm working at, you don't have a lot of time to experiment and discover, right? There's even that, if you've seen that behind the scenes there's like I think it's Twin Peaks. I think it's Twin Peaks: The Return, where there's an amazing video where David Lynch is told how much time he has left on a set, and he blows up because he's like, I never have time to just explore and improvise and discover and dream.
Right.
Everybody's like, cut, and look at the clock, and the train has got to go, and we've got 4 hours on this set and 16 setups to get, and it's always breathing down my neck. And you have to say, if David Lynch doesn't feel like he gets enough time to be experimental and to follow his instinct, what hope is there?
Right.
For any of us. I did just see a YouTube video about that amazing year in Spielberg's life when he did Jurassic Park and Schindler's List together, and I had never realized it, but Schindler's List, I think, was the first movie that he didn't storyboard.
Oh.
That both because he was, well, probably most importantly because aesthetically he was taking cues from a lot of documentaries,
right?
And maybe also because the nature of the narrative didn't want to feel like such a sanitized, safe, traditional Hollywood drama,
right?
That it's handheld cameras, it's figuring out the blocking and the staging and the camera work on the day as things are happening. Mm-hmm. But that was a movie that, like his Jurassic Park, because of the effects and because of everything else, I think was pre-planned within an inch of its life. And Schindler's List was full of improvisation and discovery,
right?
Which is just I don't know, if you were going to do a biographical film about Spielberg, I think it could just be a single 10-minute shot of him walking off. It's some big scene happening in the concentration camp that he's in, and cut, and then he walks to his trailer and watches a test animation of a brontosaurus, and it's like, all right, let's see, you need more rim lights separating the dinosaur from the trees, and let's put some more liquid on the teeth,
right?
and can you boost the red coming from the fire? And all right, I'll see it in a week.
Nope, there you go.
and then kind of collapses on the rug like Michael Cera in that Arrested Development.
Right. Just falls face down.
I do try to embrace accidents as they happen. It is to a much more limited. My films do not have as much unpredictable chaos as The Island of Dr. Moreau, Apocalypse Now, or Schindler's List.
Right.
But I do try to, even if some of them are pre-planned in a way, because I often build the audio track first, right? That I do sort of a radio edit of, because most of these movies have been built on, on interviews.
Right.
And then I start planning out the videos. There are certainly ways in which lots of discoveries are made. The new film Ghost Boy, which we've just started to screen now, a lot of it was our subject sort of reading selections from his memoir, mm-hmm. that to me was inspired by there's an amazing performance film, Swimming to Cambodia. But after each section, I would ask him questions. And this guy, Martin Pistorius, he doesn't speak traditionally. He has to use text to voice software.
Right.
So the question and answer period can take a minute. You have to sort of adjust and account for that. But there was when you see the movie, the last question, which brings an answer that ties it into, that gives us the bookend for the way the movie starts, was something I had no idea. I was being kind of cute and funny with sort of a jokey question,
right?
But he surprised me with an unbelievable answer that was inevitably the ending for, and I knew it when I heard it, like, okay, this is the ending of the movie. He has just given me. And I think that's happened on most of them. Like, in 237, right? Like there's a passage where, John Fell Ryan says, and as I've been watching this movie, I've been transforming into Jack in a way that we're about to move across the country into some isolated place. And there were 2 or 3 other connections between what he was describing and the beginning of The Shining.
Right.
And, to me, the ending of that movie is not, and this is what The Shining is about, but the ending of that movie was because of my studies, because of my obsession of this film, I'm turning into Jack Torrance. And I was like, as I heard it, I'm like, yes, this is the ending, and it's an idea that could never have occurred to me. Right. And in The Nightmare, there was a similar one of, there's a guy who's like, yes, because I have my breathing issues, I'm afraid that sleep paralysis is going to kill me, but it will have been worth it because of the glimpse it has given me beyond the veil.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
So yeah, I think I think it's probably similar. My process has been different than most people's, but I think most any responsible filmmaker keeps their eyes and ears open to take advantage of amazing accidents, right. unpredictable moments that can occur. That if you don't, then the movie can only be as good as what you can think of while drinking coffee and eating and eating sandwiches in a air conditioned room, looking at drawings on the wall.
Right.
But for it to have that extra spark, movies are made by a ton of people, and you have to open yourself up to some surprising, unexpected element that comes from the interaction of a few of them on the day in a place.
Right. I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah. That feels like, as you said, I feel like this is the ending of the.
Right.
That's a great way to end the conversation.
Well, I wasn't planning on talking about that when putting my Dr. Moreau notes together this morning.
No, I mean, that's a perfect moment for sure.
So I know you said, Ghost Boy, I know, is your new project. It's just screening.
It's doing the festivals. It's doing the festival circuit now, and then we'll be released maybe in the fall or early New Year. It's still TBD.
Right.
And then just today we announced Decanalog via Vinegar Syndrome is putting out a Blu-ray collection of my short films.
Oh, great!
Yeah, that's awesome.
Early, rare, movies that go back. I think the oldest one contains footage that was shot in the early '90s on the set of a music video that Doris Wishman directed.
Wow.
And then the newest one is probably something I did for Shudder, Primal Screen, a documentary about the Uncanny Valley and ventriloquism.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I saw that on Shudder. I enjoyed that.
Yeah. The S from Hell is on it, and, a bunch of things all kind of strung together like a mixtape.
Right. I like it.
That's really cool. Yeah, I love everything Vinegar Syndrome does, so that's
oh, God,
that's a great partnership.
Oh, yeah, they're amazing. And this is their sister label, Decanalog, who has put out some amazing stuff. They did Early Victor Romeo, that amazing one about they dramatized black box recordings from plane crashes.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Huh, okay. I've not seen that. That does sound really interesting, though.
Yeah, that's very cool.
All right. Well, is there anything else? I mean, I know you've got, that sounds like two big exciting projects coming. So
And
yeah,
everything else is speculative.
Fair enough.
That was a journey, guys.
well,
thank
thank
you.
you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. It was really great to talk to you.
Yeah, everybody back on the boat. All right, and next week, Anthony, I believe we're going to get a little classy.
Yes, yeah. So we are getting, next week is our 200th episode.
Beautiful.
So it seemed like the time to get back to some actual movies called Frankenstein, but especially this is one that I've kind of been struggling with knowing how to handle this.
Yep.
And I think this might end up being one of our longest episodes. I don't know. We'll have to see. But we're going to be talking about the British National Theatre production of Frankenstein. If you're not familiar with this production, its claim to fame is that Victor Frankenstein and the Frankenstein monster are both played by a guy who played Sherlock Holmes. We got Benedict Cumberbatch. We got Johnny Lee Miller.
Beautiful.
Who's playing which? That all depends because they did it both ways. So we're actually going to be sort of talking about two movies that are the same movie but different movies because we're going to be talking about Benedict Cumberbatch as Victor Frankenstein while Johnny Lee Miller's the monster, and then they flip it. They did this
Right.
for a while in the British National Theatre every other night, which is insane. They had to memorize both of these
parts.
two parts because every other night they're switching. And I think it was during COVID they released them where you could see them, and they released both versions, so we have those. I have been dying to watch this. I've been wanting to watch it since before the podcast and before they had released it. And when they
Right.
finally did, we were already doing the show, and I was like, I got to save this because it's going to be big. And so I have not seen this. I've seen a couple clips, and I know it looks crazy and really cool. But I had specifically been holding off until we could do this together. So I'm very, very excited to get to this next week.
Oh, so excited. Let's do that. So, Anthony, where can they find us, my friend?
So you can find us on all the socials at The Frankencast. You can email us at thefrankencast@gmail.com. We're also over on YouTube. And, of course, you can always find us at patreon.com/thefrankencast, where we're always doing new, different stuff. If you like this kind of thing where we're just kind of chatting and sort of outside of the, regimented thing we usually do, you can find a lot more of that kind of stuff over at Patreon.
Absolutely. Well, anything else to be said?
I think that's it.
All right, well, thank you one more time, and to be continued.
Looks like you survived another episode. The Frankencast is a production of FCR Media. It's hosted by Anthony Bowman and Eric Velasquez. Follow us on Twitter at The Frankencast, or send us a letter at thefrankencast@gmail.com. Our cover art is by Amanda Keller. You can find her at Keller Illustrations on Instagram. Our theme music is by Vivek Abhishek. Thanks for listening.